Okay, boom. According to that, I'm live. Sorry, I'm a little bit late. I just had a new type of technical issue. My old trusty iPhone 7, I think it is. It's warm. I was just charging it, but it will not start. It appears bricked. So I was trying to figure out what to do with that because that's what I normally run the Flipboard slides on. So I'm using a different phone. I'm using my iPhone 10X or XS or whatever you call it. Uh, yeah, we'll see how that goes. Sometimes it has things where like notifications pop up in the middle, and I've got to go back and fix it later on. So hopefully that won't happen. But yes. Anyway, we're here. It's been a quiet week news-wise. I've been very busy work-wise, so I haven't been tweeting very much. And just going through the topics, I've only got about 10. That said, like I say, on weeks when I don't have many topics, I'll think, oh, hey, I'm going to finish this in no time, and give me your questions and give me your topics and say hello and do all that stuff. And it always ends up that I'm still 10 minutes over an hour. I always go for 70 minutes no matter what. So we'll see how I go tonight when it genuinely is a small number of stories. As always, yes, that's right. Do what Andrea just did and say my name, and it will show up as highlighted, as you can see. I'll go through the normal thing and say hello to everybody. I think one bit of great news this week is that I don't have any Olympic stories. I know that there's a G7 right now, and everyone's saying yes, we fully support the Olympics. I'm kind of tired of it. I'm really glad that there's nothing at all to talk about this week. I mean, other than just normal shenanigans. So yeah, I'm not going to do that. But let's dive in, see who's in here. See tons of people already waiting. Great to see everyone. We've got Shubas, and Shubas is from Panama, and Shubas is not late. Great to have you in here. Who else we got here? We have Aaron, we have Odie Jr., we have Dan H, Butterboom. Actually, that's quite good, Dan H. Now that I say it out loud, I get it. Yes, indeed, Butterboom. Oh, I think I'm going to use that. Quinn Ranked, good to see you. Thank you always, Aaron. Appreciate moderating skills and editing skills always. Who else we got in here? We've got Dan H. You wonder if what's better to watch, the English football game for now or the President of the USA matching down my town Windsor, or watching Hiko Simon talking about Japanese news. Yeah, well, I mean, do both. I assume you can watch the soccer on the TV, but very, very much appreciate you joining this. This is recorded technically, so I suppose if you really are that into it, you can watch the football. In New Zealand and Australia, we call it by the original name that it was called soccer before it was called football in the UK, and we call it that. But and rugby was football before soccer was. But yes, go watch roundball. I mean, nothing wrong with that sort of thing. Tennis is on in Australia and long weekend in Australia, so definitely enjoy that. Andrea. Who else we got in here? We've got going down the list. Mr. Cordy Chep, good to see you as always. The Olympics should go ahead. After all, what is another breakout between friends, right? Yeah, they're planning for like 7 cases a day. Oh, there was one story that came out, which come think of it, I don't know that I put that in the topics, but yes, they're planning on the basis that there'll be 7 new cases every day during the Olympics, which I don't know, it seems low to me. But then other people would say, or have said, oh, so even how is that acceptable? So yeah. Oh, what's happening? Battery dramas. No? Ugh, hate that. New phone setup. That should not be pausing like that, however. Anyway, I'm going to keep going down. Is that Jake Adelstein? It's funny, I always say Jake Adelstein in my head, but it's Jake Adelstein, isn't it? I appreciate the correction on that, but check it out. The author of Tokyo Vice and former Tokyo Tonight guest. I actually went to his house to interview him, which I found very memorable. Excellent to see you, Jake. Welcome your opinions. Actually, there's some good topics on tonight, which I'm sure you have something to say. So opinions welcome. We've got Sergeant Bilko. Hello to you, and thank you for the shout out there. As always, yes, remember, do what Sergeant Bilko did if you want to get my attention. Otherwise, I'll probably scan past. Checking out who else is in here, hoping I don't miss anybody, but Andrea, Mr. Cordy Chip, we've got Lysander 45, good to see you, and you've just had KFC for lunch, you're ready for the boom. Well, that's what I do, that's what I bring the boom, and you have come here, KFC prepared, good to see. Yeah, get a snack. Yabba dabba do. Jax Ashbolt, good to see you, Jax Ashbolt. Yeah, great to see you back. Thank you for saying hello. PB, good to see you. Greetings, humans. You come in peace. I'm very glad to hear that. Oh, and there was just something there. Oh, it just jumps ahead like that sometimes. Indeed, 3-day weekend in Melbourne. So you've got the tennis on TV. Glad you're enjoying that. Already said hello to Odie Jr., Mr. Cordy Chip, Jax, the butter ants. Yes, you saw the origin story. Why even the emoji is censored on this channel. I think Google actually knows that I'm emotionally triggered by it. Excellent to see you. Believe in yourself. Welcome into the comments. Great to see you as always. Man in Canada, good to see. And I get the feeling it just jumped past some comments aimed at me. No, I guess not, but great to see you. Salutations right back at you. A Devoid, good to see you. Morning from Arizona. Good to have Arizona back in the house, and good to see you. Bilko's here, so can we start? Yes, you can start. Sadiq, hello from Miami. Yeah, hello indeed, good to have you, Miami. Dan H, did I hear that the Olympic volunteers quitting due to some people actually being paid for doing the same work? Oh, yeah, I didn't want to talk about the Olympics, but I can talk about that since you brought it up. I will do that. Mr. Kodijep, I need to get my tech together, or needs an advisor. Well, you know, my iPhone 7 dying. I'd love to have an Apple help desk person available, but I'd only need it once every 5. There's always something there. The Governor General gets paid $500,000 a year. I'm sure that they don't really deserve it, but there you go. Temiko, good to see you, Temiko. Kia ora. And yes, indeed, the butter icon test, it's back to being censored. I don't know what's happening there. And we are caught up on... Oh, DJ Sunny Side Up. Hi, fam. Hi, good to see you, man. And if I missed you, say hello. And if you haven't said hello yet, say hello. It's just lovely to see everybody. Coming back, I'll tell you what, I don't have many topics tonight, so I'm probably going to do what I always do and spend too much time on the ones that I have. I'll talk about Dan H's comment right there. Did I hear about the Olympic volunteers quitting due to some people actually getting paid for doing the same work? It's it's complicated. There are something like over 70,000. Hey, Icepick 1878, slightly intimidating username, but very glad to see the subscription. Thank you. Yeah, there are something like 70,000 volunteers. I think originally there were like 100,000, and there have been some number like 20,000 people quitting. Some people declaring, writing to the Tokyo government saying, I'm quitting because it's irresponsible to be having the Olympics with COVID, or I don't feel safe, or there's no promises that volunteers will be vaccinated. Although recently, very recently, the government, I mean, we're like 30 days now to the Olympics, and now the government's saying, yeah, you know what, maybe we'll vaccinate the volunteers. How are they not going to do that? Yeah, the government's responded interestingly. Most of the people who were quitting being volunteers, you know, sort of basically because they lost their motivation to be volunteers. And the government sort of responded, and the Tokyo, when I say the government, the Tokyo Olympic Committee and the Tokyo government primarily responded saying, yeah, well, you know, half the volunteers were to be like tourist guides and guides for foreigners and so on. And given that there are going to be no foreign spectators, we can manage with fewer spectators. So that's one aspect of it, where even though you know, people saying, oh, can you hold the Olympics without all the volunteers, with all the volunteers quitting, and it seems like they're insisting that they can, and it kind of makes sense. But yeah, another thing that has been going on indeed is that some of the work, and bear in mind the demands on, oh, DJ Sunny Side Up, good to have you subscribing. Why did it die again? Don't do that. Oh, you know what? This is the thing when I change phones. I'm going to have to keep tapping the screen. That is annoying. Anyway, I'm just going to keep my finger on the screen so it doesn't pass out. Yes. coming back, the thing with yes, the volunteers are being asked to give like 8-hour long days, like over 2 weeks, no compensation whatsoever, which again, volunteering isn't very common in Japanese society sort of to begin with, but there are some roles which, yes, they were looking for people from the volunteer organization, and because they didn't have those roles, or just because they just wanted to have those people sort of in full time, yeah, the government contracted with certain well, I think some of it will probably get traced back to Dentsu, ultimately, the big monopoly advertising company and marketing company. But yeah, they've gone to temp agencies and they've actually paid kind of like excessively very generous wages to some people who are doing tasks which otherwise are being done by volunteers. And there's been the question about whether that's wasteful spending. I don't know that volunteers have quit because of finding out that those people are getting paid, although it just adds to the general appearance of corruption and inappropriate spending of money and kickbacks and so on, which is always associated with Olympics. So, yeah, I haven't heard much about that being specifically tied to people, to the very large number of reasons that many volunteers are quitting. But that said, a lot are. So, yeah, I think the best justification at this point would be not feeling safe. And for that, the government should have just said ages ago that, yeah, all volunteers will get special access to vaccines, which I actually think is a reasonable thing to do. And it seems like they're finally getting around to that. So, yeah. Coming back down into, I see there's more people saying hello. I see we've got Jay's M, good to see you. Milchman, yo, indeed. Good to have you. We've got Jay's M, good to see you. The New Zealand and Australian senior politicians massively overpaid compared to their population sizes. Well, if they pay according to population size, I mean, New Zealand, you'd be getting like supermarket checkout wages. I'm not sure that's exactly the way that it works. I actually saw, I didn't include it in the topics, but I saw a ranking of the most livable cities in the world. Number one was Auckland, the city I've lived in the longest. No, you know what? That's actually not true at all. That's before coming to Japan. That's the city I spent the longest growing up in. Although I also lived in Wellington, which came fourth equal with Wellington. So yeah, I lived in Wellington, which came fourth equal with Tokyo. What was it? Auckland was 1, Tokyo was 2, and fourth equal was Osaka and Wellington, which to me was kind of crazy. Like, New Zealand's lovely, but there's just, I still think of it as a place which felt very limiting to be in, and going back, really expensive. So I think nowadays they like, and I've actually read articles in the New Zealand University Magazine, my New Zealand Auckland University Magazine, from people returning from Tokyo because of COVID, saying that the wages aren't as good in Tokyo, but the cost of living is cheaper. Which, hell, I mean, again, I love New Zealand, but I don't know why I would live in Auckland and have less to do. And you know, even if you could earn more money, I'd rather be here. Personally, that's why I'm here. But there again, this ranking of cities, Auckland came out on top. It looks like, you know, one of the very few downgrades it's possible to do to move to Tokyo. It looks like I did. So yeah, it's interesting. Yes, indeed. I think you are right there, Andrea Morboy, that my timeout on my home screen, I can't change the setting on the home screen timeout on my, this is my regular phone, because my other phone, this is the whole reason I set up this phone just for doing this show, so that the screen would never go off. This one I can't control it because of software on it. So yes, I'm just going to have to keep tapping it every now and then. But Christopher Luke, excellent to see me. Got to do my tasks. Yes, indeed. What? You have cousins and an auntie in Auckland. Yeah, it's a lovely place. Too many lockdowns. I think I've said hello to everybody. Let's dive into the topics now. And remember, yeah, if you want to ask me a question, get my attention, dive in. But the first thing I want to talk about tonight, actually, just before I started the show, there's been some movement on this. But it turns out that Toshiba, so remember Toshiba, I like Toshiba. I've talked about Toshiba before because they've been through all sorts of governance scandals. It turned out that they're in the rush for always challenge, the corporate motto that they had. It turned out they interpreted that challenge kind of means trying hard in Japanese, you know, the way they've adapted the use of the term. And there was sort of like every division of this company, which has like a shampoo division as well as like computers and so on, that they had found, they were a bit like Olympus. They had too many divisions and they were generating still great profitability somehow, even though nobody could see how they were earning money. Maddie, yo, good to see you, and good to see Sainted Sir as well. So it turned out that they were flubbing the books. There were a lot of circular transactions. They were inappropriately booking and accounting, and actually the accounting practices caused Toshiba to be delisted as a top tier company. And after a huge internal cleanup and cleaning up the books and apologizing, they just got, I believe this about a year ago, they got relisted back on the stock exchange top list of companies again. But basically massive corporate governance, deceptive accounting, deceiving shareholders with deceptive accounting practices that sort of signaled that and was covering up that the company was actually doing as badly and as struggling as much as you'd expect from Japanese semiconductor, computer companies, where basically everything that they are good at has now been taken over by Chinese and Korean companies. So, they've been struggling to find their sort of place against, naturally cheaper competition in their high-tech spaces, and trying to figure out what to do with their solid-state memory and all the sort of stuff that they generate most of their income from. And, they just got back, and it turns out they went and did something a little bit naughty last year when they were having a shareholders meeting. While their share price tanked because they lost the trust of all their shareholders, some for overseas investors decided that they would do the company the favor of buying its stock. They put the stock on the share market, in order for it to be available as a source of sort of, capital for the company. And a foreign investment firm, come think of it, what was the name of that company? Will it even show up here? Effissimo Capital Management holds 9.9% of Toshiba shares, and they are activist, i.e. they have ideas for what Toshiba should be doing, both in terms of the composition of their board and what it should be doing to resume trust and profitability. And at the last shareholder meeting, Japanese shareholder meetings are notorious. Back in the days, if Jake Adelstein is still watching this, he'd be able to tell the story about the Sokai. Sokai are the general meetings of shareholders. And there are Sokai ya, basically shops that just make a business of shareholder meetings, where they would just be basically gangsters who would go in and threaten to make a scene at shareholder meetings unless they are paid off by the execs of the company. The idea being that the execs of the company basically want the shareholder meetings to just be a rubber stamp on whatever they're doing. And it was an easy way for gangsters and people willing to act to mad dog the shareholders meeting to get paid off. And this is a big problem that again partly led to the collapse of the bubble. It was good business for organized crime syndicates back in the day, that they would reveal their ties and they would seek the dismissal of the board and whatnot. So there's been this problem in the past with the way that Japanese companies feel very compelled to not be accountable to shareholders. In fact, to try to control the shareholder meetings to minimize unexpected participation by activist shareholders. And this group basically wanted to put forward some, they informed the company that at the shareholders meeting they were going to put forward some resolutions. And Toshiba, freaking out about this, decided that they would go to the Ministry of Economy, Trade and Industry and said, hey, can you look into them, and maybe you can restrict their based on import-export laws and requirements for capital investment firms operating in Japan. Could you investigate them and maybe put some sort of freeze on them that will prevent them from being able to participate in the meeting? And apparently METI cooperated with this. So you talk about things like the Nissan story and the Olympus story, where it seems that in cases of sort of corporate malfeasance, basically the nationalist line, it seems that when people go out for political or for administrative or bureaucratic or police favors even, in order to in order to save Japanese companies from foreigners essentially trying to exercise the rights that they are allowed to have. Japanese companies, the Japanese government promotes the idea of foreign investors and foreign capital coming into Japan. But when they want to act like they are investors in these companies, it becomes sort of a national defense issue. All of a sudden it becomes, to go into my butter ram mode, it becomes a bit North Korean. It becomes a bit just because these companies buy a bunch of the shares, they think they're entitled to act like shareholders. And by the way, this goes quite deep into society. I've talked about this before. I remember there was an NHK poll, I believe, a few years ago, which just surveyed regular Japanese people on who do Japanese people think owns companies. It's a fairly simple question of if you grew up in the era of capitalism versus communism. I'm sure there are kids in America who can recite off that shareholders own companies. In Japan, on the survey, it was interesting. Most people responded. Japan, most capitalist country in the world and all of that, or by some measures, the overwhelming feeling was that the employees, the workers, own the companies, followed by the management of the company, followed by shareholders in order of responses. So it's kind of funny. It could be said like many other things, like like the Victorian morality code that was imported into Japan, and all these other things that have been imported but not really fully bought into in Japan. Capitalism. People don't expect the idea of having shareholders that actually have ownership rights in companies is something that terrifies a lot of companies. It's why companies set up cross shareholdings with other companies, where they basically agree to hold shares of other companies in order to keep out troublemaker investors that might want to tell companies how they should be run. And they agree to be friends with each other and not to challenge each other's management. This is how companies sort of basically manage to be listed companies with shareholders and avoid any interference. So coming back to the story, Toshiba was afraid of basically this company wanting to exercise their rights, their voting rights, and and they asked for help from METI to be able to obstruct that through triggering some investigations to see if they were all above board in order to basically obstruct their ability to participate. And the result of that was, hey, Mitchell Atlas, good to have you in here. I know you were looking out for this story. And yes, asked if they could do something to prevent them participating, and they succeeded. But the result is that they protested after the shareholders meeting, saying that their meeting was not fairly managed. It was basically managed to prevent and block them from participating and exercising their shareholder rights, which they dismissed at the time last year. But then they called for an independent audit, which was held. And that independent audit results came back, I believe, day before yesterday, saying that, yes, indeed, Toshiba directors directly colluded with the Ministry of Economy, Trade and Industry to come up with a pretext to prevent their participation in the shareholder meeting, effectively to block shareholders from exercising their rights in the shareholder meeting. And as a result, it just came out this evening that 2 vice presidents and 2 directors of Toshiba are resigning to take responsibility for probably getting caught. But again, you have to, the whole idea that the Japanese government, on the one hand, it's like they're the perfect McDonald's store. It's clean, it's got the right menu and all the staff and everything. They set it up with the perfect appearance of being a company that welcomes foreign investment and encourages it. The government actively promotes these sorts of companies from coming to Japan and contributing their capital to helping Japanese growth and supporting Japanese companies. And Toshiba is a company which was basically, on the brink of complete collapse and complete loss of trust for its accounting scandals a few years ago. And they came back, and the first thing that they do is they basically do a backroom deal with a regulator who cooperated with them to block foreign investors from simply speaking up at the, kind of reminiscent a little bit of the way that Japanese companies used to prevent gangsters from speaking up at their shareholder meetings. But this was a normal shareholder wanting to exercise their normal rights as shareholders. So it just reminds me, last week I talked about the story how, for example, the government is demanding that every company in Japan achieve 70% telework. And, to make themselves accountable to the same sort of standards. Same with labor standards, by the way. They set these labor standards. And yet the government, in fact, even the ministries that administer these targets, like I believe it's the Ministry of Labor and the Ministry of Economy, Trade and Industry, which make these rules about working hours as well as the telework requirements. And yet when it comes to them actually complying with the laws and the rules that they impose on everybody else, I mentioned last week how the government, there were people who were actually tipping off the days that they would do the secret spot inspections of telework, and they would say, okay, everybody, telework only tomorrow and come back the day after that, so it looks like we're teleworking and we're making up the numbers, which again reflects somewhat disturbingly, and I'm sure this isn't unique to Japan, but it does show that in Japan, the lack of ethics in administration. I mean, the fact that I jokingly, well, not even joke, it wasn't even a joke. It was exactly that kind of behavior that led to the tipping off about the bad loan bank inspections of banks in the 1990s that basically led to the collapse of the entire banking sector in Japan. It was people trying to look after one another by doing something that was illegal, but probably not recognized as being morally wrong. They probably thought that they were doing something okay, helping their friends out. But of course, the reason it was illegal is because there was a morality behind it, and people were just being willfully blind to that. Same with the inspections on telework, and same in the case here when Toshiba asked for help, and again, some bureaucrats in government willingly gave it. But it wasn't just illegal to do that; it was completely ethically immoral. And now you've got people resigning for it. And again, Toshiba. And think about it from this. I mean, one, who in the hell would want to invest in Toshiba, if they treat their shareholders like this, when they desperately need the capital for it? And then you've got METI. How can people trust METI saying, oh no, we want your money in Japan? Well, yeah, they want the money. They just want you to give the money and be quiet about it. Like political donations. But again, how can you trust that? It looks like another example of the Japanese government overwhelmingly favoring even on ethical matters, when it becomes foreigners versus Japanese, they'll always take the nationalist line of protecting. They'd rather protect immoral Japanese over whistleblowers, like you have in Olympus. In these sorts of cases, the government, the police will overwhelmingly. And by the way, Nissan is a complicated case. I don't buy at all the fact that Gon ran away the way that he did. I feel terrible for the guy who still is in custody and on trial, and I wish him the best. But Gon, no, I actually don't have any sympathy for. So I don't think it's black and white that Gon was a victim of collusion by Nissan and the police to get rid of a foreigner. Although I'll also say at the same time that that was part of it. I mean, that was part of it. The police jumped in very enthusiastically, and it was pretty clear that when the police started cooperating with Nissan, there wasn't really a clear case. They were fishing, looking for something to pin on him, and it just turned out. I'm not unconvinced that there isn't something there, actually, but, that they didn't find certain things. But at the same time, it started out as a nationalism, get rid of the foreigners exercise. And I think it's a terrible look for Japan's international image that this happened, and for investing in Japan. And it could very well be that, look, this Effissimo Capital, they could be a predatory hedge fund. They could be looking to, it's entirely possible that they're not looking out in the best interest of the workers and the hundreds of thousands. I believe that Toshiba has more than 100,000 employees, and they could be very well looking to be the Gordon Gekko, trying to strip the company of its assets and cash in from taking Toshiba apart, which is they could very well. And that's the sort of thing I'm sure that when they look at these foreign investment firms and so on, that's I'm sure what they're afraid of. But at the same time, they sold shares to them, and they made themselves available to do that. So yeah, it's complicated. But it looks like, again, Toshiba's just absolutely destroying themselves from doing this. So yeah, believe in yourself. You miss your Maxima. They were good, solid cars. License to 45. I have half the topics to cover. Tap to watch. Yes, indeed. Next topic. I've only done one topic in the first 30 minutes, but I thought this was an interesting one. Yeah, I thought I had plenty of time, but I've still got 7 topics left, which isn't very much. But I think I should move on. Anyway, I will go into the topics quickly. Long time no see, indeed. Ooh. Boom, 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 boom. Let's. I guess my screen timing out is the main thing for this. But yeah, the hard disk division was sold off. So what does it even do now? I think they still have some solid state memory and some semiconductor stuff, but indeed I couldn't tell you exactly what they do. And Dan H, that's because there's a lot of sales tax. Inflation hasn't affected the cost of. This is the cost of living, indeed. Yeah, Japan has an artificially low sales tax, and it's politically suicide to adjust it. In fact, I wonder what's happening with the plans for that. I think it was delayed by Abe, but yes, that's right. That's definitely part of the reason. Things have not changed in price in the 23 years I've been here. So, yeah, and they've changed a lot. When I go back to Australia and New Zealand, they've definitely changed a lot. So anyway, next topic. Vaccine stuff. What was this one again? Oh, yeah, it looks like that now. If you look at will this show graphs? By absolute numbers now, check it out. Japan, the pink line, actually is now vaccinating more people every day than, I believe it's now taking over Germany and France and the United Kingdom. It's only behind the United States. This is for raw numbers. Now, of course, Japan has a much bigger population than the UK, France, or Germany. But in terms of the, again, when the curve, when Japan was that pink line, when it hadn't even started back in March and everyone else had started, and when it wasn't going up at all, and people talking about how Japan was a disaster. And sure, I mean, half the vaccines are made in Germany. Of course, they're giving them to themselves first, and in the UK and in the United States. And I actually understood that. But it must be said, look, I'm impressed as hell. And I think, it doesn't mean I'm saying vote the LDP, but one, the government seems to have figured out a path to build up momentum, albeit by starting late. And it's not just that. It's the local governments. Some local governments have been super innovative in getting these numbers up. The national, lots of companies, lots of different people coming together to figure out how to accelerate this. With corporate vaccinations just today starting, where All Nippon Airways became the first company in Japan to start vaccinating its employees. That'll start in earnest on the 21st of June. And the idea of getting up to 1 million vaccinations a day, which of course, remember, again, it's got a large population. It'll still take a long time to get through everybody with that. But yeah, the Suga declared that at least on the target rates that they're going to by November, everyone in Japan who wants a vaccination will be able to be fully vaccinated by the end of November, was what he said in Parliament the other day. Big question there about how much Japanese actually want to be vaccinated. They found with the big mass vaccination centers, the elderly are not using the open slots. 80% of the 10,000 a day slots for vaccination shots in Otomachi at the Self-Defense Force Run Center are left unused at the moment. When the government checked why that is, or NHK checked why that is, they found in most cases it was more to do with elderly just not being mobile and not wanting to travel all the way to Otomachi if they can get the shot locally, and not wanting to go to all that trouble. And the response to that is that now the government actually from yesterday started prioritizing that for those open slots. They'll allow government workers, i.e. Fire people, police people, basically first responders, that those kinds of people will be able to take the reservations, and hopefully very soon, actually, maybe even on an accelerated basis, regular folk will be able to, under 65s will be able to take those slots as well. But it'll be interesting if Japan gets to like America, where, is it going to get to 70%? Given that Japan's approach to vaccinations overall, even for kids, is not to make it mandatory. And there are a lot of people in Japan who just don't get vaccination for their kids out of laziness or not being sure or whatever. And it's not pushed very hard because Japan has had a history of bad vaccines being given out with bad effects. But of course, at the moment, the government is again, they're very passive on this. They seem to be hoping that people will just want to go and get the vaccines, but at the same time, they're not really promoting it as something that's proactively as something that people need to do and that it's their responsibility to do. They're thinking about it more of making it available and assuming everybody will get them. So the good news is that right now they are ramping up, and the 1 million a day is absolutely viable. It's just a question of, is it going to stop at 70 million? Is it going to stop at 80 million? Is it going to stop at 50 million? I'm sure as hell getting mine, and I could be getting mine in a couple of months. I mean, between the local government's accelerating and corporate shots becoming available, the options are suddenly open. And I was thinking before I might not be able to get a shot before the end of the year, and all of a sudden it looks like it could be very soon. So I'm happy about that, and I'm also happy waiting in spite of the numbers, which, by the way, yesterday they went up for a week on week total. They've been going down pretty consistently, although very slowly in Tokyo. But I must say, there are a few places that would be better to wait for a long time for a shot. New Zealand is actually one of them. They've got like 0 cases in the community in the entire country at the moment. And Australia's been doing well as well, in spite of the hysteria that happens when occasionally they get a couple of cases. But yeah, Japan, I must say, on the vaccinations, they are getting their act together. For people who are looking at the initial numbers and saying, it's going to take 100 years to get everyone vaccinated, no, it actually looks like they're going to get it done within the year. It's actually a remarkable effort that you have to give them credit for, even though they started super late. Next story. Before I get to the next story, I see that there were some comments there. Will they allow travel then again? Well, you'd hope so. The government is talking. Aaron asked the question there. The government is talking proactively about using digital passports to vaccine passports, that they probably will start opening travel for people who can prove that they've been vaccinated. Certainly, I think it makes sense to allow visitors who can prove that they've been vaccinated, and There's still questions of equity and so on. But like I've said before, I don't have a problem with vaccine passports. When I lived in Singapore as a kid, it was required for me to get malaria shots when I was like 6 years old before I traveled to Singapore. Lots of countries require vaccinations before you travel to them, and I think that's going to be normal for this. And if my parents had refused me getting a malaria shot in 1982, I wouldn't have lived in Singapore. So yeah, hey Nesta, good to see Nesta's in the comments there. And is Japan planning to make it mandatory at all? Japan makes nothing mandatory. The constitution is normally the excuse, but they don't even make lockdowns mandatory, so I doubt they're going to make vaccines mandatory. I think the best way to approach it, at least in a place like Japan, is to make it clear that you will not have access to certain things. I think there should be things like you'll need to have a vaccine passport, and you should not be allowed to watch baseball games or go to movie theaters, or at least you should be required to wear masks when you do that. And I don't know. I think that they should incentivize people that way. They shouldn't make it mandatory, like a direct regulation. They should just restrict what you can do and make it a benefit. So yeah, Nesta, that's right. Nesta killed me on Among Us the other night. That was classic, and that was fine. That was fine, Nesta. That was a new way. Like I have technical issues every week, I find new and creative ways to get killed quickly on that game, including when no one had been killed yet. Nesta just hit the alarm and immediately started accusing me of being the saboteur. So yes, that was a thing. Quinn Rankin, can we see a plot of cumulative percent of population vaccinated? No, you cannot see that. It's probably in here somewhere, but I thought that was just that was a different graph which just showed absolute numbers. They exist. I mean, I tweet every day. I follow the government accounts which show the percentage penetration. Right now, because they're only proactively vaccinating over 35s, I believe over 65s. The number of over 65s who are vaccinated right now is just over 30%. Some prefectures are actually nearly at 50%. They're in the high 40s, but for the general population, they still haven't started that yet. So the population, for the overall population, I mean, 30 million people, 30% of 30 million is 10 million. So it's like it'd be less than 10% of the entire population at the moment still. So definitely nowhere near the progress of Europe or America in terms of vaccinating the population. And that's what we're going to see really from the end of this month when we start vaccinating the general population, is how far through that we can get. But yeah, it's good to see that the actual raw numbers are increasing. Lysander 45, that's right, checking watch, so I will get back into it. Oh, believe in yourself, another random item. You bought the smartwatch that you first fell in love with and it was going out of production, the Amazfit Verge. You wear it 24/7 and handle showers. Okay, I've got my smartwatch. It's a Withings. It actually got briefly bought out by Nokia, and then they sold it back to them, I think. But the Withings Active. What I love about this is that it charges in like 10 minutes, and the charge lasts for 30 days. And when I wear it running, it will actually pick up my pulse as well as my heart rate as well as my steps. So it does everything that I want, and I just don't have to charge it I can just wear it, and it looks like a normal watch, and I can wear it like a normal watch. Tempted to get the Apple smartwatch, but yeah, I actually quite like this, and it works well for my running. So yeah, I'd love to hear more about how the Verge is if you end up a happy customer with that. Last week of July, says Mitchell Atlas. Yeah, if you work for a company that offers them or a university that offers them, that is the best way. Yeah, I was sus. Apparently I was sus. I was just running around lost. I basically don't know what to do, and my hyperactivity was what got me killed there, Christopher Luke. But so yeah, Nesta. But still, that was a lot of fun. Interesting story here. As Japan's empty homes multiply, its laws are slowly catching up. So this is another story talking about the problem I've raised here before, that the statistics on the number of houses that are abandoned. And I've got on the other phone, it's already saved so I can see the whole article, but right now it is, and I can't type in my password right now. So Yes, the number of abandoned homes, I believe in some towns, the population is like, in some local districts, is like 40-50% now, that there are homes. And this talks a lot about how they end up with that problem. And apparently, the biggest cause of it is the fact that when people die, they're actually required to list up, as part of their estate, that there has to be documentation saying who the home belonged to and who it's being bequeathed to in the inheritance. But however, that's not mandatory under current laws, which means that there's a lot of cases of elderly people dying and it's not clear who now owns the property, either because they didn't do the paperwork they were supposed to do with the inheritance, or even where that's done, there's such a backlog of processing those things that local governments, often it'll go for years before local governments actually can identify who the owner of the properties are. The result of that is that, in particularly some of these towns that have a lot of old houses, which the government doesn't have powers to touch, but because it still is privately owned land, but they don't know who the private owner is, and those houses are abandoned, and they're falling apart. They're having termites and water damage and so on, and they're becoming dangerous. And some local governments have actually started to take measures to allow people to, basically the cost of making them inhabitable is also prohibitive. They can't do anything with them because their houses are, and this is effectively creating ghost towns. Like it creates a cumulative effect when half the town is abandoned. And this is happening in a lot of places in Japan. So yeah, where I thought that they would be moving more towards what would happen in a place like New Zealand, that you'd have the local council would have permission to nationalize private property that's not claimed within a certain period of time. There's some movement towards that, but apparently the first thing that they're trying to do is accelerate the processing of inheritances and making it mandatory to actually make sure that there are clear, and if there are not clear people that the property is bequeathed to, that it goes to the local council that can then tidy it up. It's one of these things. I mean, there are YouTube channels that do fix-ups on abandoned houses, but they also showed how surprisingly difficult it is to purchase an abandoned house, and how expensive it becomes. It's actually difficult in terms of administrative, in terms of paperwork, the fees that are associated, when really, a lot of these towns are dying because people are not, because they're full of these sort of houses that are falling apart, that they want to give away. They want to have tax-paying residents move from cities and fix up these houses, and they're prepared to give them away for free, but people can't pick them up that easily, even though it should be that easy. So it's a massive societal problem. And again, you talk about like these ideas where, hey, the government will pay you $1,000 if you move from Tokyo to a depopulating rural town, and there are lots of people in Tokyo that would love to do it, but $1,000 is not going to cover the costs of finding a place, buying a place, fixing it up, and then the problems of, can they work remotely there? Even if they can work remotely there, is there a good enough internet connection to be able to work remotely there and to be able to continue the jobs from Tokyo, or to contribute to the local economy by setting up a local business? So while the government is like obsessed with this idea that there are too many people in Tokyo and the big cities, and they want them to move to rural towns, and the rural towns are suffering from all of these abandoned houses, the obvious fix of allowing people to come and move and occupy these abandoned houses and contribute to these dying towns are all tied up in bureaucracy. And again, and the only way that the government's really shown the national government's shown a willingness to fix the problem is to offer to pay families that move, $1,000 cash. We'll give you a bunch of cash. That's much simpler than actually fixing all the bureaucratic problems that make it impossible for you to move in the first place. When really, think about it. Would you rather have $1,000 cash or a house for free? That's livable, and that allows you to continue your work and earn money in a place where your money will go a lot further. That's the solution. These are difficult problems to fix. It's interesting that it's so tied into the inheritance tax issue, or to the inheritance issue. But it's a major problem, and it's a problem that, again, you think about Japan's, this is one aspect of Japan's demographic problems, but other countries, even America now, has this declining birth rate. This is the sort of thing that happens. Arguably, I think a lot of common law countries actually already have laws that are a lot more aggressive in this regard, but it still is. It feels like a really massive wasted opportunity to me for what should be a very fixable problem. So for me, the idea of even just having like a holiday house, right, that, you know, that at least even as a holiday house, you've still then got people willing to come and fix it up, and people that are going to come and spend time in it, that are going to make it livable, not look like a haunted house, and families and so on that'll come, even if it's on weekends or whatever. That still is better than having the house completely abandoned. I mean, there are parts of Japan, you know, like if I could go surfing or driving distance from Tokyo and I could get a house for the price of a car, which is what they should be, given the state that some of them are in. Yeah, it's a problem which should be fixing itself, and it's like red tape is preventing it from being fixed. It's illogical. So that is a thing. Yeah, I found this really, really interesting yesterday. This is, if you've worked in IT in Japan, I used to work I've actually worked in IT, I suppose, for my first 3 years. And then I worked at a law firm which was involved with IT, but then I worked in 4 years in another IT company, and now another, 5 years. So I guess adds up to 12 years. I've worked 12 years in IT in Japan. And yeah, two interesting, really interesting cases. That one and this one that follows right after, about the kind of the reason that IT just sucks in Japan. I know that IT jobs in America and Australia and Singapore, places like that, are high paying, respected, you know, the jobs that everyone sort of wants. And in Japan, they're low paying, and they are work to death type jobs. And people often ask me, you know, why are things so different in Japan? And this is a perfect example. The facts that were described in this article in Japanese and X-Tech, at least just on the first page. The second and third pages where I couldn't read the whole thing, that's behind the paywall, but they provide a lot of detail on the first page. And they go through that basically there was IBM was doing an IT implementation for Nomura, and basically it got over budget and behind time, and in the end of the day the project sort of fell apart. And Nomura sued IBM for screwing up the project and trying to get their money back and to pay them damages. And at the initial stage, Nomura won. The project failed. IBM failed to deliver on time. You know, the project basically they failed the migration and so on. And IBM lost. And again, this shows that it can be really risky for IT companies, because you think that they're paying all the wages and all the sort of costs. And, you know, if they fail a project, which takes a couple of years, and they have to pay back all the money from that, it's not just, you know, then all of a sudden the company is basically paying these people for nothing for all of this time. So even for a big company like IBM, this is sort of as a big risk. And there's a question as to whether that's fair. I mean, for the Japanese customers, they feel like, yes, you know, you IT company, external big IT company, you're supposed to make everything work for us. And if it didn't work, then you have to give us the money back, is the sort of mentality. However, the facts of the case that caused it to be reversed on appeal, it reads like every case that I've ever done. The company orders the IT company to come in and migrate, you know, set up a new, they didn't say exactly which package, but it sounds like it was like an SAP implementation, which is what I used to do. They came in and said, hey, implement it, but they ran into, there was like a middle manager on the customer side, on the Nomura side, who was basically against the whole implementation and basically obstructed it. By basically continuously changing the specification and the requirements and blocking approvals on programs and sending abusive letters towards the IT company, trying to prevent them from proceeding with the project, and you know, both verbally abusive and obstructive of the whole thing. And the Nomura side didn't do anything to exercise control over the employee, over the middle manager on the Nomura side. That was basically ruining the project and making it impossible to deliver. That was my experience of doing SAP stuff, that, you know, the leads of the IT company and the leads of the company will say, yeah, we're going to do this big IT transformation, and we're not going to do any customization. We're going to do it super fast, and it's going to transform the company and make it more profitable, and the shareholders are going to love me for it. And they agree to it. But when you start doing it in Japanese companies, the actual operational people normally haven't been consulted. This has been imposed on them, and they don't want to cooperate with it. And yeah, they're obstructive, and they refuse to allow anything to change. And what ends up happening is that these projects end up being where you try to put in a system that doesn't change anything. That you basically end up trying to, on a new system, do exactly what the old system did without any changes. And typically management is very, very passive about that. And they try to, it becomes an arm wrestle where they try to change the entire project, where they want everything to be customized, and they want to force the IT company to suck it up and do the extra work for free. Yeah, they'll often do that. And the result is that they will force the employees on the project to work weekends and overtime, but they'll also pressure. Back in my day, we were pressured to not report our working hours, so that we would charge as if we were working till 5 o'clock, even though we were staying to 3 o'clock every night and working weekends. So basically, it all got pushed down the chain to basically towards abuse of the workers. And in this case, it went to a point that the project failed. And the court acknowledged that it was the Norma failing to control its own manager and who was sending these abusive mails and basically sabotaging the project internally that caused it to fail. And it wasn't IBM's fault, and IBM doesn't have to pay back the money. And I must admit, I'm neutral on IBM. There are a couple of other famous cases involving IBM where they were like project managers for projects that failed, and they were forced to like cover the cost of the failure of the project, which was just ridiculous. But that is a precedent in Japan. But this, I'm like, hurrah! I mean, honestly, so many Japanese companies basically use IT companies like janitors. They're not hiring them for any sort of expert advice. They don't feel that IT consultants have any place to be able to tell you how you should run your systems. Ironically, they want everything to be based around the manual that they already have and not change anything. And that's why IT in Japan is miserable. Yeah. Hey, Andrea, thanks for the tennis update there, by the way. Ben Grant, I have not shaved a sheep, actually. I may well have done that if I'd stayed, but I left, so there you go. Yeah, again, if you're interested in working in IT in Japan, it's better than it used to be, but it still is pretty dark, and that is why. And I must admit, seeing IBM get vindicated basically based on behavior from Nomura that reads like every single IT project that I've ever participated in or supported, there is some measure of the behavior of both the abusive managers that are not being controlled, and the scope changes and the scope creep, and the sort of opposition to the project itself. You look at Mizuho. I've talked about Mizuho a bunch of times and how that project just became a complete disaster. That is a much worse case than this. But this one as well, Nomura actually felt like they could sue IBM and get their money back. And the other courts have told them, no, it's your fault that it got screwed up. Hoorah. That's exactly how it should be. Jake Ashbolt, how good was my Japanese when I first got to Japan? It's kind of funny. It's hard. It's a bit like asking, it's a bit like if I asked you, Jex, if you, how good was your English when you were 5? You don't really remember. Of course, you know objectively that you didn't know a lot of words when you were 5 years old, but at the same time, you don't really remember. So let me put it this way. When I got to Japan, I had a degree where I had full Japanese papers through my second year, but I didn't actually pass well enough to get into third year. I took some third year papers. I did have a Japanese girlfriend for a few years after that, and I worked at a Japanese souvenir shop where I got to speak Japanese every day. So I had a very distorted difference between my reading, writing ability and my speaking ability. I was very lucky to get the job that I got in Japan, but it was partly because I knew how to interview in Japanese. I could speak much, much better than I could read. So I could speak well enough to get by day to day, like daily life in Japanese, but I had very, very big gaps. So I was basically, I would say, maybe like an 8-year-old kid. I could say daily life stuff, but when I'm on an IT project and everything's in Japanese, and everything is basically gibberish, I was really in trouble with that. But at the same time, I came to Japan pretty confident. I was like a kid that I could express pretty much anything that I wanted to say, but I'd have to look up words a lot. And I was in over my head definitely when I came, but I didn't come here as a learner. I already spoke Japanese pretty well when I came. At least as a student, I was not a good student, but I was about as far as you could probably get good at speaking Japanese without living in Japan before I came here. And when I came here, I sort of spent the first 3 years closing that gap. It took me a few years to get level 1 Japanese, but I could operate within a Japanese company. I was slow, I'd have to look up words a lot. I'd have to skip the words I didn't understand, and that caused problems sometimes. So I was basically like a very low IQ Japanese person, or a kid, basically. I'd say I was probably like about 11-year-old or a 12-year-old. And now my Japanese is honestly probably 17-year-old, 18-year-old. I did pass level 1, which says I could get into university in Japan, but that was at one moment in time where I cram learned a lot of stuff. But Nowadays, you know what? I have no problem in any situation now. My daily life in Japan doing this sort of work is all in Japanese. When I got here, I was probably like a kid. It didn't feel. It's hard to remember not being good at Japanese, but I do remember I was more confident than I actually was. I couldn't back it up, but hope that answers the question. Yeah, yeah. Definitely a good idea if you want to come to Japan. Definitely you'll learn a lot faster when you come to Japan, and arguably it's better to learn it here because you won't learn bad habits. You'll be hearing it from Japanese people. You won't pick it up with a funny accent like you can learn it when you're learning outside of Japan. But certainly I would say it's a good idea to learn and get as far as you can get before you come here if you can't be here anyway. That's that one. And look at that, we're coming up on time, but I do want to talk about this. The minister of the head of the digital agency, I guess director of the digital agency, which doesn't start until September, but interesting case where a voice recording of him talking with his advisors on very similar to the last case that I just said. Apparently for the Olympics, NEC had promised a facial recognition system at venues and at airports, which would be to track mainly international visitors who were coming in, that it could ID them and match them with their tickets, so they wouldn't have to interact with the staff or whatever. It would all be automated, and there was going to be this massive tens of millions of dollars system that they'd contracted with NEC to build for them for all of the foreign visitors and so on. And of course, it turned out that with COVID and with the foreign visitors not coming, the government wanted to back out of that contract, even though that already, NEC was already working on it, and but it wasn't necessary anymore. And so when the upcoming head of the digital agency was talking with his advisors on what to do, basically they wanted NEC to let them basically not pay. They wanted to cancel the contract, even though NEC had been working on it. So yeah, they basically said in rough terms, they sort of said that he was advising them on how to go to talk to NEC to get them to agree to drop the contract for the facial recognition system that they were building. And while they were discussing negotiation tactics, he said, "Hey, just threaten them. If they're belligerent about this, if they want to hold us to the contract, just tell them that we won't use them for any more work." For government IT, just make it clear to them, threaten them, and make it clear they don't have a choice but to accept our demand, that we do not intend to pay them, and if they don't accept that, then they're going to suffer consequences. It sounded like a Yakuza call, and he admitted himself that he was speaking roughly. It was like Sopranos roughly that he was talking about, basically. That they would block NEC, but this is the truth of IT and government in Japan. The threat is never getting sued by the government or failing delivery. The threat is getting banned from work from the government. And for a company like NEC that does like half the government's IT, it's a pretty heavy hammer to hit them with. But it made it clear that your choice is between $70 million on this deal, or $1 billion that we give you another work that we're going to block if you don't agree to let us not pay for this. So again, really abusive treatment of IT companies. And again, you think about these companies, this is why they kill their workers and they screw them with overtime and they don't pay them, because you have constantly these companies like Nomura and the government screwing them over on these things. And again, I've worked in this field, and it really annoys the hell out of me. I mean, again, it's just illegal and unethical. Final story, second to final story. Okay, I'm going to go super fast on the final two. The first one is the government has, it seems that they are banning transactions with 5 Vietnamese companies that basically staff people for these apprenticeship visas, which are the visas that people use for basically finding low-wage Vietnamese workers to work on farms in Japan and small factories and whatnot. Apparently, the problem of too many of these apprentice workers, basically often indentured workers, people working off debts and whatever, the introduction companies find these people, they send them to Japan, they hook them up with the often far below minimum wage paying jobs in Japanese farms and whatnot, where in many cases they have their passports taken away and are locked up and not given any money and are sort of basically imprisoned and treated like indentured labor. And these people run away. And while the clear problem, which has even been raised by the Japanese media, the clear problem here is the abuse of those workers that causes them to run away. The government sees this as a case of indentured workers escaping, and they are punishing the introduction Vietnamese companies that introduce these workers for having too many of them run away. Which again, I mean, I said half dark humid and half, I mean, the characteristics of this, when you are literally false imprisoning people and abusing them and not paying them, basically, or not legally paying them. And the way that the government reacts when they run away, like not wondering, oh, are they okay? You know, should we punish their employer? No, they treat them like runaways. Like, you know, this is a kind of modern slavery system. It's the way that the system is being used. It's being used purely to abuse foreign workers. And instead of taking responsibility to ensure the proper, appropriate treatment and human rights of those workers, instead they're punishing the introduction companies for producing too many runaways. It's just astounding to me that, again, the Ministry of Justice doesn't look at this as a labor and human rights issue. They look at this as a too many slaves running away problem, and banning the traders that introduce them. Please, Vietnamese companies, try to introduce people that don't run away when they are imprisoned and not paid and not fed and have their passports stolen. Work harder. Absolutely ridiculous, but that is something that happened. The final thing is, I didn't know about this, but apparently this is actually a thing. Some people, there is a thing where people will actually use their hankos to, like, when you've got a chain of approvals, one typical thing is you'll have a piece of paper go around. Everyone will get their stamp and they'll put it on the paper to indicate that they've read it or that they approve. And apparently this is a thing. The junior person on the bottom will actually tilt their hanko, like, you know, really deeply and put theirs, and all the way up to the boss by seniority. It's basically they use their hanko to signify bowing on the chain. I thought that was a joke. I've never seen that before, and I've certainly never done that before, and I've been on those hanko chains myself. Maybe I just didn't pay attention, but apparently this is like a thing. Not all companies do, but some companies do, and some people talking about the absurdity of Japanese hanko culture and why it needs to be gotten rid of. This isn't a Japanese commentary about this, but this is why they don't want to do digitization. With some companies, they find this sort of thing very important. You know, another thing is that a lot of companies won't use Zoom unless they can actually arrange the screens in an order that allows them to reflect seniority on the screen. So yeah, a long way to go. By the way, Taro Kono announced this week that all Japanese government departments have to cease using faxes for standard operations by the end of June, and if they don't, they have to explain to him why. Which is interesting, because my son's school, when he joined primary school, I was told that I had to buy a fax because all notices to the school, if he's not feeling well or he's going to be late for school, parents are required to notify the school by fax. They won't accept a phone call. They won't accept an email. You have to still send a fax. So I have a fax, which the only thing I use it for is a couple of times a year, if my son isn't well, I'll send a fax to the school. And that's typical. A lot of Japanese governments require filings and notices. They require tender bids, everything to be done by fax. And he said everything has to be switched by the end of the month to email or other means, or explain why otherwise. And it's actually, given how deeply entrenched the use of fax is in government, and this sort of use of hanko, you know, in this kind of ridiculous practices, as deeply entrenched as they are, yeah, I must admit, it's a very cultural revolution of Taro Kono, but he's been doing this all over the place, and I must admit, it makes me kind of like the guy. I like his fashionable, daily changing face masks, and I like his orders to the bureaucracy to pull their socks up and so on. So, yeah, interesting times. And I mean, it's weird culture. It's one less thing for everybody to have to remember, but those are all the topics for tonight, and I'm 10 minutes over. Although I did start 4 minutes late because I was having problems with my iPhone that appears to be bricked. So that's a thing. I mean, it's an old iPhone and that's all that I use it for, but that's a thing that happened anyway. That's the show. Final look at the comments to see if I missed any comments that were directed at me. Believe in yourself. When you were 3, your mother was carrying your brother and had a tough time with this, had to stay on the bed mostly, took advantage of this, demanded to be taught how to read. Okay, well, that's actually, I'm surprised you can remember, but yeah. Most people can't remember that sort of going through those stages of not being able to read or not being able to speak. It's a funny thing about human development that we forget not being able to do things. But yeah, that's where it's hard for me to remember a little bit, but I can certainly contextualize. I know where I was at when I joined and how I learned, and hope that helped, Jex. And Andrea, sorry if you don't know about IT or speak Japanese, but you know, I can't beat I can't be all things to all people, but yes. I think that's it. Anyway, it's great to see everybody this week. Not so many topics, but still things to talk about. Atomic Tom, good to see you. Listening from the forest via 4G. Hey, if you get your vaccination, it could be 5G. I can't wait to get mine. I mean, anyway, very glad to have our friends in Panama, Arizona, Miami, and the forest, and moving to North Carolina, perhaps. I have no idea, but good to see everybody here tonight. Thank you, everybody, for joining in the comments, as always. And yeah, I'm not going anywhere. I'm going to be here next week, same time every week, 10:30 p.m. Japan Standard Time. And have a great morning, afternoon, evening, wherever you are. I know it's late for people in Australia that tuned in. And take care of yourself. Remember, you can follow me on Twitter. I've been a bit quiet lately, but you can follow me there. Many thanks again to Erin for being the awesome moderator and editor of the videos during the week. And, oh, Jex, I'm so jealous. And, yeah, keep cool till after school. See you next week. Ka kite ano. Peace. Boom. See you then. Now it's really over. It's dead to press end show. So end show. Boom. Peace. End.